Hi, welcome to another episode of South Jersey Secrets. This is Jessica.
And this is David. And on today's episode, we're going to explore New Jersey's cursed highway, Route 55. We heard a lot of questions about this one, if it's haunted, if it's really cursed, or if there's something else going on, maybe a little bit more of a mundane explanation. So we're going to explore and find out.
In fact, when we first announced that we were going to do this podcast, there were a lot of individuals that asked us about Route 55 if we were going to cover an episode on it. So the mythos behind it is fairly pervasive. Apparently, a lot of people around here have some bad experiences or thoughts around Route 55. Well, a discussion about Route 55 would be impossible without a comparison to the movie Poltergeist, as the main concern, thought, idea behind Route 55 and why it has problems is because supposedly it's built on an Indian burial ground.
And as any Poltergeist fan would know, the house that in Poltergeist was built on a burial ground. I don't think it was an Indian burial ground in Poltergeist, but it was built
in
on
the movie?
Yeah, in the movie.
No, in the movie it was supposed to be an Indian burial ground and they didn't move the bodies.
Okay.
Remember the scene? You didn't move the bodies.
Yeah, you didn't move the bodies, but when the coffins came up from the ground, they were all dapperly dressed people from like the 1930s, and I didn't think it was like an Indian burial ground, but Zak Bagans from Ghost Adventures always says everything's built on an Indian burial ground, which is why there's a curse and vortexes and other strange things.
This is true. And in fact, they just had an episode around the movie Poltergeist and the curse that was linked to that movie. What many people may not know is there were a number of just bad happenings after the movie. Actors who died of unusual diseases, murders, stalking, just all kinds of ugly essentially after that movie. So the movie got the reputation for being cursed above and beyond what the subject matter was of the movie itself. And you're right. I don't know if it was an Indian burial ground.
Yeah, well,
I don't know. You're absolutely right that the coffins and such wouldn't make any sort of sense, for an Indian burial ground. But
yeah,
I don't know. I have to rewatch it.
Because you might be thinking of Pet Sematary.
Maybe. You're right. Too many horror movies. Back to Route 55. Either way, don't build things on burial grounds. But we'll talk more about that later in the episode.
Yeah. So a lot of South Jersey natives know about Route 55, and we call it, our own cursed highway. And there's been a lot of controversy about Route 55 when it was built back in the 1950s. So I'd like to go back a little bit and let's just go into the history of Route 55. I'm going to pause really quickly here because I got to push cats off the table. Yeah, and you go off. Okay.
South Jersey Secrets, frequently interrupted by South Jersey's two sphynx cats.
Yes, Edison and Tesla, which they are on Instagram, and I'll put a link in the show notes for their Instagram account. Okay, so back to Route 55. Construction. In the 1950s, it was...
Wasn't it actually 1955? Just, for all the other unusual happenings. I think Route 55 was started in 1955. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, South Jersey historians, but...
Yeah, and if that's correct or incorrect, please leave a comment below so then we can see you yelling at us for not getting 100% accuracy. So in the 1950s, it was built and supposed to be a road from Cape May to Camden. And construction was halted due to lack of funding in the 1960s. And that's when Route 55 was briefly named the Road to Nowhere.
Which should have everyone who knows that song now humming it.
Yeah. You want to give them a refresher?
No, I'm not going to sing the song.
No,
nobody needs to hear that.
All right. Well, just
remember, we're on a road to nowhere.
We're on a road to nowhere.
Hey.
So another interesting fact that I didn't know was that it was supposed to be a toll road called the Cape May Expressway, which
makes sense for New Jersey.
Yeah, everything has to be a toll road.
Charge some money.
Which I always think of Robin Hood Men in Tights. If we don't get our tolls, then we don't get our rolls.
You're just too many movies. Too many movies.
Sorry. In 1965, it received the moniker Route 55, and the construction continued. Now, in 1983, construction through Deptford in New Jersey began.
And this, folks, is where the curse starts to come into play, because prior to now, the real curse was just typical New Jersey, a road that wasn't being finished. When they decided to build this connector in Deptford, there was a lot of controversy from the get-go. There was actually a lawsuit to stop construction right away in 1983 from preservationists in the area.
And the reason why the preservationists launched or issued a lawsuit was because, according to Dr. Charles Pierce, a SACHEM chief, SACHEM, if I'm mispronouncing that.
SACHEM.
I apologize. He was a chief of chiefs of the 40,000 member Delaware Nation. And in an article by the New York Times featuring him, he issued a warning about the construction that was happening in the Deptford area of Route 55.
And a lot of folks believe this was actually a part of the curse, that he issued a curse against the construction. From everything we've researched, it doesn't appear that he did specifically levy a curse. Instead, it really does sound like he was just warning that the highway was going to be built on sacred ground and that it was not right.
And by sacred ground, he said that there was a burial ground in the area because they were finding artifacts, which we'll explore that a little bit later in the episode.
I mean, honestly, come on. Everything here is a graveyard. They keep finding bodies every time they seem to dig. So I don't think he was far off in thinking that there was likely some sort of corpses in the area. Again, I mean, since I've lived here, they've already found bodies several times in basic construction. And folks, I've only lived here about 3 years.
Yeah, we have a little research down below in our show notes about this. And the short answer is New Jersey has a lot of historical battle sites, a lot of Lenape native communities that used to be here prior to the settlers. And we are one of the 13 colonies, so we have a lot of history in this area. People may forget that and think
bodies, lots and lots of bodies and bones, kids.
Back to the history here. The third phase of Route 55, connecting Route 55 to Route 42, was completed in 1985.
And just to make it extra spooky, via exit 13.
The 13th exit.
The 13th exit.
Which, if any Jersey Devil fans listening, you know what we're referencing.
This poor highway was doomed.
According to the New York Times article from November 24th, 1985, is this new road tempting fate? This is when the curse supposedly began.
According to the New York Times now. Remember, Dr. Pierce had already issued a curse back in 1983, but New York Times was about 2 years too late and said the curse was beginning at their timeline. I'm not sure. But hey, it's the New York Times. Maybe they knew something we didn't.
Or maybe they're just a little bit slow. I was about to mention that.
Yeah, possibly. Possibly. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, there's very few areas of New Jersey where you won't be disturbing some sort of archaeological space. There's so much history in this area. Everywhere you go, everywhere you drive, everywhere you walk, you're walking on history, which is pretty cool when you think about it. But there is, I don't know how much people know about the Native American settlements in this area. They're, over 8,000 years old, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. So based on what Dr. Pierce was saying, there were a number of digs that happened and scans and such that happened in the area where Route 55 was being built. And they did find a number of artifacts. They found spear tips, knives, tools, pottery. And he basically came back around and said that taking up these artifacts represented a disturbance of the dead and that Indian lore was laden with tales of reprisals against the living by the dead when that occurred. So once more, a curse is levied on this particular highway.
Did you have a Route 55 experience? Leave a comment below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.
So that's a little bit about the history of Route 55 and its construction. As noted, this poor highway has never been finished, which is a curse in and of itself. And the section that was built in the Deptford area, again, the area that is considered to be the most cursed, certainly had a series of catastrophes while it was being built. Now, keep in mind, this was about a 2-year project. And during that time, there was just an amazing amount of tragedy that occurred. The site superintendent, Carl Kruger, in the New York Times article said terrible things that were happening to members of my crew could hardly be explained and were absolutely unbelievable. And there's so many incidences of just absolute, again, tragedy while these folks are working on that section of road. There was a worker thrown off the bridge on Route 55 by mysterious wind gusts that came out of nowhere. There wasn't any other wind that day, and it killed him. Leroy Starling of Pemberton, a 34-year-old highway crew member, was crushed to death by an asphalt steamroller. That's a bad day at work. Frank Renshaw of Runnymede, an inspector on the job, was fatally stricken with an aortic aneurysm.
And according to Mr. Kruger, there are a couple other incidents that followed the construction, including 2 workers falling ill with cancer, a miscarriage by the wife of a worker, and a string of minor injuries which seemed to end when the crew stopped moving the earth and when the north end section where the burial ground is located was completed.
And just because construction ended, the series of tragedies did not. There was a van carrying 5 Department of Transportation workers that essentially exploded and caught fire, killing them all, and they've never determined what the cause of that explosion was.
Now, earlier in November of '85, Dr. Pierce said that a tractor-trailer jackknifed while entering the new section, and there have been other minor incidents. However, the state police and transportation department sources said they have no record of the tractor incident. Now, I have to note, if I'm thinking about where that spot is that he's referencing, where you get onto Route 55 from 42, a lot of people love to speed around that turn, and they go super fast, including tractor trailers. So I'm kind of not surprised if someone did have that accident while driving a tractor trailer around there.
So going back to Mr. Kruger, the site supervisor, he's actually part Cherokee, and he had about 25 years experience in working these sorts of sites. He said he had absolutely no belief that an Indian curse was at work, but then promptly died of cancer after completion of Route 55.
Which I found that piece of information out on Weird New Jersey. I wasn't able to find any specific cause of death for Mr. Kruger, so you have to take that with a grain of salt.
The tragedies didn't stop when the construction stopped, unfortunately. There have been just a tremendous amount of accidents, deaths, and various awful incidents on Route 55. And again, this is all done respectfully, of course, but just some of the individuals who unfortunately lost their lives on Route 55. One of them was a former Miss New Jersey. Kara McCullen died in 2016 after her car spun out. She was not wearing a seatbelt. No other cars were involved at that point.
There's also the incident of the girl in the white dress. A lot of people, when they saw the video of this girl walking in the middle of the night, they thought she was actually a ghost.
Well, there were several people who even saw her while driving, too.
Yeah, and I'm putting a video in here from a driver who caught her walking along the highway, Route 55, in the middle of the night.
It's super creepy.
He recorded in slow motion, though, so that's why it's also kind of just weird and distorted. But
still creepy.
This incident occurred on Friday, March 25th, and the Washington Township Police confirmed that this was actually a real girl who was wearing a white dress and who walked off from Robin's Nest, a local children's services facility, in the middle of the night.
Still kind of creepy. Now, where I first actually heard that Route 55 was cursed, unfortunately came from a real-life incident involving somebody that we knew. There was a waitress that worked at Philomena who was killed when Stanley Kahana from Philadelphia basically swerved into the other lane, or the wrong lane, where he shouldn't have been driving, and hit, her name was Jennifer Huffnell from Deptford, head on, and she died from the collision. So I remember reading our local neighborhood Facebook group, Deptford Talks, and there were just so many people talking about the curse of Route 55. In addition to speaking about her, we always had great interactions with her. We're regulars at Philomena, and she was great. And, for two people who are newer to the area, it was just kind of a real shock to find out somebody that we got to know was gone. So again, people just kept talking over and over again about the curse of Route 55, which is what sort of piqued my interest to look into the road and what was happening there.
Now, we also had some other incidents in Route 55 that were just more bizarre. One of them in 2023 was a whole lot of chicken guts and entrails that were spilled all over the road.
Gross. And this is going to be its own South Jersey Secrets episode, but there is a ghost. It's a young boy. He's known as the ATCO ghost. And he's seen often at the end of Route 55, now closer to the Cape May area. But again, that'll be its own episode. So the girl in white was disproven, but the little boy, the ATCO ghost, lives on.
Now, we also have, whenever you're driving along Route 55, you'll see a lot of these just memorials all along the road.
Yeah, there's so many roadside memorials on Route 55, more than I've seen on just about any highway that I've driven on. And I've driven on a lot of highways. So it's stunning just how many of these exist on this road.
The Weird New Jersey article that I also referenced here, the author's brother has a memorial near exit 50 on Route 55.
There was a police officer, Frankie L. Williams, that he has a memorial by mileposts 20 and 23. And this was interesting because when they were discussing putting up his memorial, there was a state of New Jersey regulation that came about, discussion rather, that they wanted to regulate roadside memorials so families could have a
sign.
Yeah, a standard sign instead of a homemade memorial to honor their loved ones. And the state of New Jersey, there were several senators that were involved in this. They were arguing that roadside memorials were too distracting and dangerous. And of course, in classic New Jersey, they were going to add extra forms for you to fill out to create your memorial sign and also charge you a fee.
Now, to our knowledge, this did not pass, but I think personally this would not have been a good idea for a number of reasons. Just, as any New Jersey resident already knows, there's so many layers of bureaucracy and so many fees that we have to pay for everything, and a sign itself sometimes might not be enough for a grieving family when they're trying to commemorate their lost loved one.
I personally think roadside memorials are eerie, yes, but they can be absolutely beautiful and cathartic as well. People put them out there to remember the last place their loved one was when they passed. And in some ways, it can serve as a warning and a reminder that this tragedy occurred. So putting government regulation on is a little strange, yes. And I do think it adds to the complex history of Route 55. And it may even serve, unfortunately, as a source of anxiety for people when they're driving on it. I don't believe they're distractions necessarily. So many people I know don't even notice them, honestly, on the road. But I do think when people do, they're spooked. They can be spooked.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that roadside memorials are distracting, and I feel like they serve as a necessary warning, but also as a place for grieving. And for me, whenever I'm driving and I see a memorial there, I think about how I can be a better driver on the road. On Route 55, though, I've had several near accidents, and none of them were my fault. There are too many at night, drowsy drivers or inebriated drivers, or you can see them, they're swerving in and out of lanes. People who are texting, people who are just going way too fast. And there's this awful interchange when you go by the Deptford Mall, and you go from 65 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour on a jug handle in this exit. The exits aren't long enough. The road is very long. It's very dark at night. I can see how a lot of people can get into an accident here.
And, this is kind of where David and I differ, because he's more familiar with this area. He, grew up in this area, and, he's never had really a ghostly, cursed type of experience on Route 55. I have never liked this road. So when I was coming from Philadelphia to look at houses over here, I would frequently have to go on Route 55, and I just never got a good feeling anytime I hit this road. Maybe because it was such a narrow 2-lane kind of, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And there's always a ton of traffic, on it, as there are on all Jersey roads. So I just never felt really comfortable. I like knowing that there is a place for me to escape, essentially, if there's a bad driver. And I've never felt that on Route 55. There also seems to be a lot of nervous drivers on Route 55. Maybe they're thinking of the curse. Again, I didn't know that early on, but I just noticed a lot of people, just like David was saying, drove very, very badly on it. But here's something really strange that seems to happen to me with Route 55, almost to the point now, it's happened so often, rather, that I frequently will put in avoid highways simply to avoid Route 55. But Google Maps likes to detour me to Route 55 all the time, even when it makes zero sense to take that road. I have to commute to Philadelphia sometimes in the morning for work, and it will shoot me past my local close exit to take Route 55, which may or may not, often does not, save me any actual time, and just instead puts me under this terrible exit that is always crowded with people passing people on the shoulder and driving nuts. And then it's also taken me onto Route 55 from areas like Swedesboro and Woodstown, basically making me drive past Deptford into Woodbury and then circle back around from Woodbury. Anyway, it just doesn't make any sense. So I think Google Maps is in on the curse somehow and deliberately trying to get me on Route 55. David thinks I'm nuts, but it keeps happening.
I actually like driving on Route 55, though. I think it's beautiful. There's this lush canopy on the sides of the road when you're getting off of 42 and you're going down the road. And then when you're going down the shore, you can see the tree line just kind of change, and then you see a lot more just like sand and grass, and it's a beautiful road, at least I think, when I'm driving down there.
Anyway, like I said, I don't like this road. I don't feel safe on this road. And honestly, knowing about the curse just makes me feel even worse about it. And I do really feel for all the individuals that have been affected by this piece of concrete. And there's so many more that we could talk about, but it is, in my opinion, a little unusual. And maybe it did come from disrupting the earth and building on top of history and not acknowledging it. And maybe that's a way to break the curse. Maybe we could put some sort of plaque or statue or something to honor the Native Americans who were here before us.
I think that's a starting point. This is a nation of people that were driven out, and it's important to acknowledge that they were driven out from New Jersey, Delaware, and the surrounding 13 colonies. And they actually have a presence in the Midwest and a museum down in Delaware now. But I feel like a statue, a plaque, museum, that should be the start for something to acknowledge and honor the people that were here before us that we just brazenly paved over.
We should take a note maybe from Colorado, for example, who does have entire museums, exhibits, and frequent, speaking engagements, et cetera, on the Native history there. It's sort of normalized at this point to have it hand in hand with the, other history that exists in those areas. Another basic way to break a curse, of course, is just to drive more carefully. Don't pass on the shoulder. That is bad.
Well, stay in the right lane unless if you're trying to pass someone too. I hate it when you see someone in the left and the right lane and they're going 55 instead of 65 or trying to speed up to pass somebody. So stay in the right lane unless if you're passing.
Yes, and when your exit comes up, it's not a race. You just need to slow down and exit the highway as best you can. Again, that interchange is awful by the mall. I avoid it, except when Google tries to get me there.
And be just a little more considerate of your fellow man. It's easy to yell at a car, but the person who's in that car might be having just as a bad day as you are. So just have a little bit more patience when on the road.
And I mean, honestly, I still say what I said earlier. The ultimate curse of Route 55 is the New Jersey curse of an unfinished highway. There is absolutely, at this time, no plan to finish this road. They know it could be beneficial, but it's not going to happen. They're saying it's too costly, and it will go through a state forest, which is a big no-no. Okay.
There's also now communities that are built in the way of where Route 55 would have to cut right through. So they would have to use eminent domain and, like you said, cut through protected state wetlands and state forests and who knows what else.
Many, many people seem to have experience with Route 55 and the Route 55 curse. We would love to hear your stories. And if we get enough of them, we'll make a second episode.
Absolutely.
So please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and send us a message about your Route 55 experiences.
And we have more episodes to come. We're going to be doing more ghost stories, local theater reviews, the best pizza in the area, and a lot more Pine Barrens lore. Is there anything else, though, that you'd like us to cover? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed our comprehensive discussion around Route 55. Tune in next time.